Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a minute. Thank you for hanging with us, but we are back with Top Rope Takes. I'm Jason alongside Willie Thrill, and we have had a lot of wrestling in the last couple weeks to cover. But tonight, we're going to just start with a very special episode where we're going to talk exclusively about AEW, State of the Union, the fallout from Full Gear, and where we go from here. Will, good to see you, buddy. How you doing?
Doing well, yes. We kind of got derailed past couple of weeks. I was sick the week after we did our last episode, and then after that we couldn't get the scheduling right. But this time there's a lot to talk about in wrestling right now, so we're gonna cover as much as we can this week. So stay tuned. We got the State of the Union address today, and tomorrow we're gonna be talking about Survivor Series War Games and give our predictions on that. But let's talk about some AEW, Jays.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I feel like we're obviously going to get into it, but like AEW has really, I think it's fair to say, fallen off. And I think the big question on everybody's mind is what can the company do to get fans back, get fan interest back? Because the in ring quality has not diminished. It is still the best pound for pound pure pro wrestling in the world. But I think one of the things that we are really finding out here is that pro wrestling, and we've always known this, pro wrestling is more than just the in ring work. You were there, and it's quite frankly, the in ring work may be the least important aspect of pro wrestling, and I think that's being really showing its head here with the momentum that AEW has. They did just have a Full Gear pay per view that was okay. It was fine. But Will, I'd love to get your thoughts on just where you currently stand with All Elite Wrestling, what you like with what they're doing, what you don't like with what they're doing. Where are we right
All right. Well, I do want to get into all of that, but I want to make it clear just from the jump that I am and will be until they die a fan of AEW
now?
because I appreciate so much when they started up in 2019. I appreciate what they did for the wrestling business. You are being, I guess, what I don't know what the word would be like. You're not being real with yourself, for lack of a better phrase, if you believe that we would not have this current WWE right now if it weren't for AEW giving them a
Right.
little push in the behind to be better, because WWE was rough up until the start of AEW, and over the years it's kind of led to WWE forcing their hand kind of
Yes.
in a creative direction where they have been able to tell compelling stories once again, like every wrestling fan wants. And I'm very appreciative of that. And we wouldn't have this whole Cody Rhodes story run if it weren't for the existence of AEW. So I want to get that out of the way. But I also want to make it clear I have my own issues with WWE at the moment that we'll get into tomorrow during the Survivor Series War Games. Really, up until this past Friday, I was kind of iffy on this
Yes.
whole Survivor Series War Games thing. But I want to make it clear I have issues with both brands, but it's clear that AEW hasn't been what it should be. And it's funny because when you go back to that 2019 year when they first started and you look at the roster today, this roster blows the 2019 roster out of the
Yeah.
water. Like it should be the hottest it's been in its history with the
Mhm.
roster that they have. But I just think their issue right now is with the storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think it was evident with the main event of Full Gear. You had John Moxley defeat Orange Cassidy, and I thought that was a pretty good match. I thought they did a good job. I didn't think Orange Cassidy was winning, but they had a couple of decent near falls where I'm like, oh, okay, like
Right.
kind of getting me into it. But I just think that convoluted ending with Hangman coming out and Christian Cage and Jay White, I know it's probably setting up something for World's End, but when I see those four in like a kind of messy title picture
Hmm.
with John Moxley, I'm like, what are we doing? Like Christian Cage is a full blown heel, but he has this contract that could take out John Moxley and
Hmm.
another heel. You have Jay White and Hangman Page going back and forth. Jay White picking up 2 wins, but Hangman still getting involved in this title picture. Could be the savior of AEW. There's a lot of like angles they can go in that should have me interested as a fan, but because of how messy their whole title
Yeah.
picture is, I'm just not. And it's really telling. And look, it's funny that this is our comeback episode because our theme, what has been our theme throughout with AEW? What is the one thing we've been talking about? Whether
Shane
it's a joke or
McMahon.
not. Well, we've been talking about Shane McMahon, but the other name that we've been talking about a lot is the Boom
Yeah.
Big AJ.
Mhm.
And whether or not you like him or not, Jason, you can't ignore the fact that he was, in fact, the most over thing
Yes, he
on
was.
the entire show. And
Yeah.
even though I love the Costco guys, that's a problem. When
Hmm.
the most over guys on your show are TikTokers who are making a one-off appearance, but apparently they're not. We'll get into
No
that later.
shot. They're making a one-off. Yeah.
Yeah, especially after the reaction they got. And look, I loved all that. Like as a
Yeah.
fan, I was like, this is great. This is good stuff. And I think it brought in a lot of outside viewers. But I don't think those outside viewers are gonna
Stick
watch
around.
stick around, or let's say they did. Let's say
Mm,
you were an outside viewer, you watched the pre-show, you saw Big AJ come out, and they had an awesome little
mm.
celebrity style match. Big Justice got involved, hit the spear. Your guy Paul White, you kind of predicted he would get involved in this, but not in the way I think you
Yeah.
wanted him to.
No.
Protecting the Rizzler.
Yeah, he was
I
on
loved
the.
all that stuff. But
Mm,
if I was a fan of all that stuff and I was like, you know what? I'm kind of liking this presentation.
mm,
I'm gonna go buy the pay-per-view. I don't think an outside viewer is gonna watch this pay-per-view and be like, you know what? I like the Big Justice stuff, the Big
mm.
Boom AJ stuff, and I love this pay per view. And I'm going to keep watching AEW. I just don't know if that happened. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
wrong, but I just don't think there's a connection between the two.
Mm.
And the reason why I say the storytelling is a problem is because AEW tells their stories in the ring. It involves when they want to tell a story, they do a lot of it within the ring itself, which I actually do enjoy. And I think it's a good way of doing storytelling. But the issue with it is if you don't get the fans interested in those matches in the first place,
Mm.
no one's going to want to pay attention to the story you're telling in the ring. You have to get me interested in the match itself before
Yes.
they even lock up, touch each other. You
Yeah.
have to get me interested in the match itself, and then you could tell the story because then you're continuing the momentum that you've built before the match has even started.
I agree.
And with a lot of storylines going on right now, I'm confused. There was a segment on here that I thought was really good. It was the Mariah May Mina Shirakawa segment. And it reminded me of the Mariah May Tony Storm segment earlier this year.
Mm.
In a vacuum, that segment was really good. And I liked Mina kind of seeing Mariah May turning on her, stopping her in her tracks, and then spearing her off the stage. I thought all of that was great because it made Mina look like a strong baby face. She wasn't going to get fooled by Mariah May. That's all great. But because of the presentation up until this point of the women's division and what we saw earlier with the Mariah May Tony Storm segment, that was awesome, but then led
Mm.
to nothing. It doesn't give me a lot of faith in the story, which makes me not interested in their future matches.
Yeah.
They could have a great storyline coming up and a great match to follow, but because of what AEW has done over the past few months, I'm just not interested in it at all. And I don't know what exactly AEW has to do to get me over that hump. Maybe it is bring in a Shane McMahon, but that's kind of a bit over the top. That's like
Yeah.
a quick needle
It's a
in the
WCW
veins,
style.
right? And I was even joking around in my head, like, you know what? AJ's the biggest thing. Once he's back from injury, just give him the fucking title. Give him the world title. Who cares at this point? It
Yeah.
is like the chaos option that AEW might need to do it. But as you said, it's also very WCW and very much like we're just trying to get a quick boost as soon as possible, but
Mm.
then there's no substance behind it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you the question or give you the question. What does AEW have to do, in your opinion? And I'd also love to give your thoughts on AEW in general.
Yeah.
What does AEW have to do for you to get your interest back into the fold?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question. And everyone's got probably a different answer. For me, and again, I'd like to preface this by saying I also am a fan of AEW. I watch Dynamite weekly, Full Gear, Saw, but it's like low on my priority, right? Like I will watch a Monday Night Raw the day it come like right as it's airing live before I watch the Dynamite that's been in my DVR for 6 days. Um, for what AEW needs. I honestly think one of AEW's biggest problems is they haven't had a really over babyface in a really long time. You could make the argument since Cody left. Um, and I know that even when Cody left, he wasn't like the biggest babyface, but like somebody of that caliber who is a super babyface that's very over, that's gonna get people in the building. I think the closest thing they have is Will Ospreay. Certainly for me, it's made no secret about it. Will's my favorite wrestler in the world, but even he isn't getting me to a TV screen quickly these days because the programs that he's in, I just don't aren't interested with. Like for example, he worked Kyle Fletcher at Full Gear, who's a great wrestler. There's a lot of history there between them in real life, and there's great storytelling. But Kyle Fletcher isn't over. I know that's the whole point is to try and get him over, but I don't care about seeing a Will Ospreay Kyle Fletcher match. I just care about seeing Will Ospreay. I guess I'd watch him wrestle, a broomstick, but it doesn't get me invested. And so maybe that is an issue with Will. Um, I think there's so many heels on this card. I mean, I think look at the main event, right? You have John Moxley, who, for all intents and purposes, is the right person for to be AEW champion right now because they are in a space where they don't have a ton of clear direction, and he's kind of been their ace, rightfully so. So I think that's right for him to hold the title. But to be in the main event with a guy like Orange Cassidy, who is a great wrestler that's been proven, and he is over, but is he a main event guy? They've certainly tried to make him a main event guy, but but I just don't think he is. He's a super solid mid card character, and to try and pretend that he's anything more than that, I think it is an indictment on where the company's at and that they are really grasping at straws. Um, Moxley Will is maybe the big match that they're going for, and maybe Full Gear is just like their B show pay per view. Um, but I think that's the biggest issue with AW right now is just the lack of true over baby faces that people want to see win, combined with the storytelling and really just like I watched New Japan from 2019 to whatever 2022 2023. I love the Okadas and the Jay Whites and Dakota Ibushi's, who I know isn't in AEW, but like that kind of era of New Japan. I think Okada could be another big one, and they have him as a heel right now. I think Kenny Omega certainly coming back will help. So I do think that they have the ability to switch it up, but right now it's Will Ospreay and a bunch of nobodies, and I think that's if you're going to look at issues for AW, I think it starts there.
100%. And I think you brought up a good point because Will Ospreay is probably their most over babyface, and he just lost to Kyle Fletcher, so
Mm,
he took a big L. I think another big babyface they had was Swerve Strickland, and
yeah,
he just lost to Bobby Lashley. And now I was just thinking about this because looking down this Full Gear card, and I do think like a strong world champion for them that could get some ratings is a guy like Bobby Lashley. He's a
mm,
believable guy who has been a world champion before. And people, if they put the title on him, I think people would be interested in what that might entail for AEW promotion that is like, very prideful about how good their wrestling is. And putting a guy like Bobby Lashley could have almost a Brock Lesnar-esque run with the title where he
yeah,
dominates really talented wrestlers who, they get a lot of offense and they make you believe that they could finally take down this beast
mm,
style character with Bobby Lashley. But ultimately, Bobby Lashley wins. He could go on a tear. I think that would be an interesting angle for AEW to go. But the problem is, their champion right now is a heel, and they need like a true baby face to
yeah,
overcome John Moxley, which I do think down the line, and it makes sense storyline wise for it to be Darby Allin. The issue I have with that is I don't, and I love Darby Allin. Like I think he's a great wrestler, a great hand for AEW. I just don't buy him as like a world title guy
no,
who could carry the company. Like if he wins that title, I would want him to lose it to Bobby Lashley like the next week on Dynamite or
yeah,
like down the line. And that's just me personally. I get that there's people out there who would love to see Darby Allin have like a tried and true uh run with the title. But it just not a lot of things are adding up for what can get them more fans interested in the short term. I
yeah,
do think you brought up a great point. I think once Omega comes back, I think some of those original AW fans who might have, kind of fallen off the product
mm-hmm,
will tune back in to see an Omega go up against a Moxley. this time with kind of like the roles reversed, Moxley being the heel,
Mhm.
Omega being the babyface. I think there's definitely some interest there. And I think there's a lot of things they have to figure out. I think that's one of them. I think they have to figure out what's going on with like the elite, who at the beginning of the year were like really talented and popular, like heels,
Mhm.
I guess is like the right way to put it. Cause I mean, they were just like, people were like, oh, this act is so good. They like, they're really like douchebags, they're upper management, whatever. And now we're at the end of 2024 and they really have nothing to show for it. They didn't keep that momentum going throughout the year. So I think that's one thing they have to figure out. I also think another potential baby face they had, and it's also like a larger point for how their baby faces go. A baby face that they could have had with a little decent run was Ricochet when they brought him in at All In.
Yeah.
And now it's only taken a few months for him to be, a losing
Another.
challenger for a mid card title.
Yeah.
And not that I would have necessarily believed him as like an ultra main eventer, but if they
Mhm.
had kept the momentum going for him from him joining AEW and then they just had him go on an absolute tear, I would have been kind of into it. I would have given him a shot. Like, you know
Yeah.
what? They brought in this guy who's super talented. They're giving him a lot of wins. They're making him look really impressive. Why not have him challenge for the world title? Even if he does lose, at least it puts him in that main event picture right off the bat. And that way, even if he does lose, he could go into the mid card with a little bit of momentum and a little bit of rub from being in that main event scene.
I think you bring up a really good point. I think that's another issue is with the booking in general. Is I feel like Tony Khan or whoever's making these decisions is booking for great matches in a vacuum, right? Ricochet versus Takeshi is a great example of, yeah, that match is going to be incredible if you like in ring work. But the problem is, but neither guy can really afford to lose. So that, and same thing with the Will Ospreay Kyle Fletcher thing, which is arguably a bigger example. Kyle Fletcher just had a big heel turn. Obviously, that's why they had him pick up the win. But again, Will Ospreay is like your only true, really over babyface. Do you really want him losing to who is essentially a mid card guy in Kyle Fletcher? Um, and it's like, yeah, you're booking for matches, but you're not booking for business. So like again, and that goes back to your point with Ricochet. Ricochet should have immediately he picked up a couple wins when he got in, and then he lost to Will. Now he's lost to Takeshita. Who is he actually beating? Like legitimately. I couldn't even tell you who were some of the names that he's beaten one on one. And I think that's the problem is Takeshita should have been up against a guy who could afford to lose, and Ricochet should have been up against the heel that he could afford to beat. Same thing with Osprey and Kyle Fletcher. Yes, you can tell the Kyle Fletcher and Will Osprey story down the line eventually, but I think that would have been best served after Kyle Fletcher had picked up some wins over people who could afford to lose and made him look stronger. Whereas now you've gotten this big story out of the way, and now where do you go from here? You're just going to continue the Will Osprey, Kyle Fletcher stuff. Will's eventually going to pick up his win, and then what? Kyle Fletcher's done. And I think that's a real issue. I think jumping into bed too quickly with these stories that really aren't beneficial for anyone in the long run is really something that AEW's got to look at themselves and figure out how can they do this better. Um, Again, Kyle Fletcher is a great talent, but it would have been better served to have him actually climb the card, which is what you're theoretically supposed to do in pro wrestling is you don't just get hot shotted into a main event. You're supposed to win the mid card title and then gain a following and get over with a crowd, and then you're in the main event. Um, and to just put him right in there with Will because they're real life buddies, and Will wants to do him a favor and try and get him over by having him lose to him, that's great for now until what happens. Either you will lose his luster or Kyle Fletcher's still not over because you haven't warmed the crowd up to him yet. And now he's just a mid card act who's really brought Will down with him. So I think that is a larger picture of some of their issues with AEW. And again, I watch it. I love the in ring work. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about these three big points that AEW needs to really think about going forward.
Yeah, and I'll kind of come full circle here because I do remember there being a report that came out a few months ago that said Tony Khan no longer does long term booking. Like he books now week to week. A lot of the wrestlers don't know what they're doing, within the next few weeks, let alone a few months down the line. And I do think that could be a huge way to turn things around is whether you know what, book till World's End,
Mhm.
but start to think about after World's End, what is your through line from the beginning of the year pretty much till Double or Nothing. Like build a full like 5 to 6 months where you know what the world champions doing, what the
Mhm.
international champions doing, what the women's champions are doing, what the tag team championships are doing, and then any other big major storylines. If you could build like a solid 5 to 6 months from the beginning of the year to Double or Nothing,
Mhm.
I think they'll be in a good place. Or honestly, it should be from the beginning of the year to All In, since All In's in July.
Yeah.
Like you have that nice solid 6, 7 months. Because if you look at WWE, what's made them, so successful, especially coming up to the new year, is that, even if there's like kind of a lull between SummerSlam and Survivor Series,
Mhm.
that once you get to Survivor Series, from that point until WrestleMania, they have like an idea of what they want to do, at least in the
Right.
new modern WWE. You can kind of see where things are going leading up from Survivor Series to the Royal Rumble to Elimination Chamber and then to WrestleMania. And it
Mhm.
gives fans kind of something to anticipate every single month as they head into the new year. Whereas AEW, they had their, Power Four pay per views when they first started, which I think gave everyone like a good, okay, we're going to get 2 to 3 months of solid story, then a
Mhm.
pay per view. Now that they have these pay per views in between, you got to start to think, how are we going to pace things out so that there's something interesting on all of these pay per views and we give people something to look forward to even more ahead of time past the pay per view that's coming up.
Yeah. I think real quick, you just made me think of this. Like going back to like, the Will and the Ricochet stuff, I think they did that way too early. They did that on like the
Oh, yeah.
big 250th anniversary episode of Dynamite, and then that was it. Like when Ricochet came back to when Ricochet came to AEW, him versus Will Ospreay was the one match everyone wanted to see, and I think the fact that they just did it too early has completely blown his momentum. I think a good example of something of a way that something like that is done correctly is look at WWE right now. Cody Rhodes versus Randy Orton, right? We know this is coming down the line. This was the biggest no-brainer program that everybody knows is going to happen at some point, and we haven't even seen it yet. And I think now we're getting to the point where people and fans are chomping at the bit to see it. And that's the whole idea. You want people to separate with their money to see it. And so you do that by holding off on it for a little bit. And I think that's maybe another symptom of what AEW's lack of long-term booking is. They're just so ready to hot shot these big matches that everyone wants to see that, and they're giving it away for free television in this case, that it's like, okay, we've seen it now. Wow, now what are we looking forward to?
I mean, think about this since I'm wearing the shirt right now. Think about CM Punk's first year in WWE versus CM Punk's first year in AEW. CM Punk's first year in AEW, he had matches with everyone. And
Mm-hmm.
it was fun to watch because we hadn't seen CM Punk in a while and you wanted to see him interact with those guys. I get that. But you look at WWE, they have had CM Punk for a year, and I get that he was injured, but they've only really given him one opponent, which means now you still have Punk Roman Reigns, Punk Cody, Punk Rollins. Like you could go down the whole roster and you have fresh new dream matches for Punk
Mm-hmm.
on the roster. Whereas in AW, there was kind of like a shorter list of guys to go after because they went through so much talent in that first year
Mm-hmm.
for him to go through. And it really left not a lot of things to be desired. Now, I think he was trying to push for newer opponents as he continued, but they immediately within the year were going to go back to CM Punk and MJF when they had guys like Kenny Omega on the table,
Yeah.
Brian Danielson on the table. So it's just interesting that philosophy. And with Ricochet, like you said, just immediately throwing him with Osprey, that could have been like you bring Ricochet in at All In One. You could have had like a year long build to bring him into All In
Mm-hmm.
the next year. I should say All In Two, and then bring him in for All In Texas. Like you could have done like a year long build where you kept them separate and then
Yeah.
you bring them together. I do think AEW can do that with certain people in certain aspects. I think one way that they could do that, and I saw that in the Continental Classic, a potential matchup was Osprey and Okada. These are
Yes.
two guys you brought in at the beginning of the year. You've kind of kept them separate. One guy had the Continental Championship, other guy had the International Championship. They still have those dream matches on the table, but I think they need to be careful about burning them instantly. When they
Yeah.
brought in Bobby Lashley, before like anything was talked about with Bobby Lashley, I'm like, I would love to see Bobby Lashley and Swerve Strickland.
Yeah.
Well, now that's done. So now, like, what else is there for Bobby Lashley to do? You kind of have to go down the line. There's a whole plethora of opponents for Bobby Lashley, but I think the best way to book those opponents for the future is to make people want those matches, make
Yes.
people like invested in seeing a Bobby Lashley and a Will Ospreay. Don't let people, they have a stare down one week. Don't do the match the next week. Have
Yeah.
them have the stare down, have it plant the seed, but then kind of let things play out on its own and see, kind of gauge interest over time. It was
Yes.
like with Punk and McIntyre earlier this year. I don't think they were planning on doing like Punk and McIntyre super soon, but
Yeah.
because of how over their interaction was earlier this year, they're like, all right, when Punk comes back, I think this is a great opponent for him right off the bat. Give him Punk McIntyre.
And
So
another
just pacing it slowly like that.
But another point to that was they saw Punk McIntyre was something that the fans wanted, but then they didn't just do it immediately once Punk returned. Like there
Good
was a
point.
build to their first match to grow the anticipation, which I think is again going back to what AEW. It's like, yeah, you're satisfying us in the short term, but in the long term, like where do we go from here? So,
Right. Just definitely do something to get the people talking and get people kind of clamoring for certain matches online. Because I do think they do have those dream match potentials
mm,
on their roster, but you need to have interactions over time to get people even more interested in those possibilities.
yeah, no, I agree. All right. Well, any other thoughts on AEW?
Um, Again, I just want to wrap this up by saying the reason why we're having this conversation in the first place is because we are fans and
Yeah.
we want the best for AEW going forward. I go on Twitter a lot, maybe too much, and I see a lot of bad faith arguments against AEW. And it still kind of bothers me. So that's why
Mm,
I don't want anyone to think this whole thing is just me bashing AEW, whatever, because I'll see on the other end of it, Bobby Lashley had a squash match against Cheeseburger, for
yeah.
example. And Cheeseburger is like when I was first getting into like the indie scene, I'm like, this guy's awesome. Like this guy, he pretends he's like 300 pounds or whatever. He's got a cool little move set. He's like a fun character. And someone on Twitter was like, wow, they have Bobby Lashley going up against this nobody named Cheeseburger. And then he got, rightfully flamed in the comments,
Yeah.
people being like, dude, this guy's like a legend. Like, you have no
Yeah.
idea what you're talking about. So I do think people have like they want to jump on AEW the second they do something that's kind of like haha AEW LOL. I don't want that to be this conversation. I wanted this conversation, and I think it was just a genuine what can AEW do to regain our interest as
Mhm.
lapsed fans of AEW.
So to recap, what we think will best serve AEW going forward. First and foremost, long-term storytelling. Figure out where you are, figure out where you're going, figure out how you get there. Number two, invest in baby faces. Pick your top stars who are going to draw money, protect them, and put them into meaningful programs. And three, build those programs. Don't just give us what we want immediately because then we have nothing to look forward to. Tease us a little bit, give us something to build toward so that when the time comes and we get the match we want, we buy your pay per view. And I think those three things will solve a lot of their issues.
100%. Yeah, don't cash out early on those dream matches. Let it kind of sit over time, and I guarantee you the money will start to rack up and you'll be able to get those gains from
Mm-hmm.
building these dream matches over time.
Yeah, when Kenny Omega comes back, his first program should not be against Okada.
Right. Well, yeah, and you know what? We're gonna probably get that anyway, but we'll see. I think you're 100% right. If when they bring back Omega, they should have a 6-month build to Omega Okada at All In.
Yeah.
and make that the big stadium match that you sell for All in Texas. Don't do it on Dynamite 300 or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. All right. Well, we're going to have more coverage this week. We're going to be talking about the WWE side of things, War Games coming up, big developments there. Will's guy, he's got a big role in it. So stay tuned on this channel. We're going to have more coming up for you. Thank you so much. And we will see you guys next time.
Peace.